Did you ever hear the story about the farmer? He was a poor man and he loved God. He was a hardworking farmer, and one day an angel appeared to this farmer, and the angel says to the farmer, "Hey, God has watched your faithfulness. He has watched your diligence in your labor, and God has decided, He sent me here today to essentially give you anything that you want." It's essentially anything you want, anything you desire, anything you need, you can have it. And the man is thinking to himself, what is it that I want? You know, should I ask for $1 million? No, maybe $10 million. What should I ask for? And then the angel stops. Just as the man is about to open his mouth, the angel stops and the angel says, "Whoa, the Lord has just told me that this is going to be an even better day than you had imagined. The Lord has told me that not only are you going to be blessed, but whatever you get, your neighbor will get two of." And the man points to his eye and says, "Take my eye." He would rather lose an eye so his neighbor could be blind than receive wealth to only have his neighbor be twice as wealthy as him. It's a dark story, isn't it? But it speaks to the natural inclination of humanity. You know, it's interesting. You may recall, my children won't, but when I was a child, making a long-distance phone call was a big deal. How many of y'all remember back when making a long-distance phone call was a big deal? And if you were on the phone too long, your mom would absolutely kill you, right? That was just 25 cents. You just spent 25 cents talking to some girl from Rapid City. What were you doing that for? Right? So it's fascinating what's happened in the United States, right? Like 90%, I think the number right now is 90% of Americans have a supercomputer in their pocket, and they never ask any question about making a long-distance phone call because you can talk on your phone as long as you want. And now that we can talk on our phones as long as we want, we don't even talk on our phones, right? But the entire standard of living in the United States has just grown, right? Like the average person has a much higher standard of living. I live much better than, the standard of living that I enjoy is higher than the standard of living that I enjoyed as a child, that my parents enjoyed as a child. And yet Americans are even more dissatisfied economically. And a big part of that is that we look at our lives and we're like, you know, life is hard for us compared to Jeff Bezos, who's building rocket ships to take joyrides to space. There's a natural, let me say it this way, there's a natural covetousness in the human heart. And the challenge with covetousness is that it doesn't orient itself around what you actually need. It orients itself around what you think you need relative to what the people around you have. Do you follow me here this morning? Covetousness keeps us from being happy with what is more than enough to be happy with if somebody else has more. We measure ourselves among ourselves, and those who do this, the Bible says, are not wise. We're going to wrestle with covetousness today. Last week we spoke about the 10 Commandments. My brother Ben here asked me a couple questions about the command of covetousness, and I made the decision. You know what? These are some important questions. We need to spend some time talking about not the 10 Commandments, we need to spend some time talking about the 10th commandment, covetousness. Covetousness is the primal human sin. Covetousness is the primal human sin. If you have a Bible, you can take it out. You have one in the pew in front of you. Go ahead and take out your Bible, Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to open to chapter 3, and we're just going to start in verse 1. We probably wouldn't have started in verse 1 unless I had just recently learned something totally unrelated to the sermon found in verse 1. So we'll start in verse 1 just because. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. Now when you hear the serpent was crafty, when you hear the word crafty, does that word strike you as a good thing or a bad thing? It's universal. It's a bad thing. That's how it strikes us all. But here's the crazy thing. If you go to the internet, you go to Blue Letter Bible, you go to Bible Gateway, you go to any of these things, and you just click on that word subtle, and then you search for the key number. Okay, this is a pro tip so you can be a better Bible student. That word is used many times in the Old Testament, and every single time, craftiness is a good thing. It's over and over. If you read the book of Proverbs, that word occurs over and over and over, and it's the wise that have this quality. Right? We read this and we're like, he's a sinister, crafty guy. But they would not, in the Hebrew, it doesn't read like this. It's this smart snake. He said to the woman, did God actually say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said you shall not eat the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows in the day that you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now I want you to notice verse 6. Verse 6 is incredible. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. I want you to see the covetous language in this text. She saw that the tree was beautiful. She saw that it was desirous to make one wise, and it kindled a desire in her, and she takes the fruit, and it's not that she needed this fruit. She had plenty of wonderful food to eat. This was the one tree that God had restricted. And so in this story, we see that the primal human sin is covetousness. And think about it this way. Just think about it this way. If Adam and Eve, in a perfect garden, in a perfect world, with every single need met, could not avoid covetousness, I think I have about a 100% chance of talking about a sin that we all struggle with. Now, here's the terrible thing about covetousness. Eve thought that she would get something great by eating this fruit. But what Eve actually received was shame and nakedness. Now, I want you to think about a time when you gave in to a lust, when you gave in to a covetous impulse. And you know that feeling where you're almost overwhelmed with desire. I said almost to kind of, but you are overwhelmed with desire. And you think that pursuing that desire will give you some kind of satisfaction. And the moment that the desire is in your hands, think about what happens. So in the moment before the desire, there is this intensity of passion and emotion and this desire. And then the moment that you have it, a tremendous collapse. Can I get a witness? You know that feeling? I'll tell you a story about three brothers. You're going to love this. Three brothers, they were each given $100,000, and they all three decided, you know what? Our goal in life is to turn this $100,000 into $10 million. Brother number one makes his investments, and they all go south, and he goes belly up. But he had met a wonderful woman while he was making those investments, got married, had kids, and when his investments went south, he basically said, well, I guess I got to go get a job, and he went and got a job. He began to work the job, and, you know, he was just a regular working guy with a wife and kids. And brother number two invested and made some small investments. Those investments succeeded. Then those investments grew. And then those investments grew. And pretty soon he had made his $10 million. And you know what? Brother number one was always looking at brother number two thinking to himself, man, look at that guy. He took that $100,000. He turned it into $10 million. He is kicking goals. Man, I wish I wasn't working this just regular old job. And now brother number two is thinking to himself, man, I worked so hard to make this $10 million. I grew all these businesses. I didn't take any time for my wife or for relationships. And here I am now in my 40s. I have no wife. I have no kids. I have nothing. And then there's brother number three. He didn't reach his goal of 10 million, but he was still doing it. He was still pursuing it. And so now he's looking at brother number one who has kids, and he's jealous and covetous of the wife and kids. He's looking at brother two. He's jealous and covetous of the guy who made his goal. And then there's number three he's jealous of, he's jealous of the other two. You follow the point of the story. Covetousness is one of those things that the desire itself leaves you unsatisfied. And so the reason we need to talk about covetousness today is that I actually believe that covetousness robs us of our joy, and it robs God of his glory. And so we just need to process this together, and then we'll look at some ways out of covetousness. I'll show you this text. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10 says, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. Now, the command to covet in Exodus chapter 20 tells us something very important, and I want you to notice. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Notice the text does not say that desire is wrong. It's not wrong to want something. It's okay to want something. Like God gave Adam and Eve the hunger for food. We share that. There's no problem wanting food. The problem was when Eve wanted God's tree. You follow it, yes or no? And so it's really important. I think the covetous problem arises in that referential relationship, right? So I have plenty of food. I actually have a friend who is Jeff Bezos' cook, right? This kid I grew up with in high school, he lives in South Dakota, and whenever Jeff is at his ranch, he's Jeff Bezos' cook on the Texas ranch, which is like the Texas ranches is like as big as Sonora, literally. His ranch is as big as Sonora. And so whenever Jeff is at the Texas ranch, my friend jumps on an airplane, flies to Texas, and is the personal chef. And my friend's a good cook, but you know, the thing is that I eat incredibly well. Like I eat really good food. The food I eat, I feel like I eat like a king, right? Like if I made 50 times as much money as I make right now, I wouldn't eat any better because I eat amazing right now. You follow me, right? So, but the covetousness part comes not so much in a desire for something good, but when we desire other people's good. It's okay to want a husband. It's okay to want a wife, just not somebody else's husband or wife. It's okay to want a car or a house, not somebody else's. It's okay to want to, you follow. Now, One of the major challenges with covetousness, one of the major problems with covetousness is that it is the opposite of the two great commandments. Now, you know the two great commandments are found here in the book of Mark chapter 12. The two great commandments are these. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and with all your mind and all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. The two great commandments are to love God and to love your neighbor. And when we choose the path of covetousness like Eve did, she exalted the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Essentially, through that process, she was exalting herself to the place of God. Covetousness is idolatry. Actually, that's what Colossians 3 verse 5 says. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. Covetousness breaks the first command to love God with all your heart. It breaks the second command to love your neighbor with all your heart. Think about it this way. I've seen this a lot, actually, in the way people treat medical doctors. Okay? How many I shouldn't ask you medical doctors to raise your hands, but how many of you have ever had a patient insinuate that you are just in the thing to make $1 bazillion for yourself via the pharmaceutical industry? Okay, I only saw one raise his hand. I see two. They're doing it subtly, right? Okay. Now, my experience with medical professionals is they happen to be super smart people who can delay gratification, who also want to help other human beings. Right? Isn't that basically what it means to be a medical professional, particularly a medical doctor? You have to delay gratification, i.e. you have to be in school forever, and you have to be intelligent enough to do the work, and you have to want to help people, because if you just wanted to make money, you'd have been an investment banker. Right? It takes less time and you make more money. So my experience is not that medical doctors are just working with pharmaceutical companies to enrich themselves, but they're people who genuinely want to help other people. You follow? My point in saying this is, covetous attitudes lead us to treat other people with suspicion. It causes us to read into people's behavior bad motives. Are you following the argument here? Covetousness keeps us from keeping the commandment to love God because it turns us into idolaters. We exalt ourselves. Covetous keeps us from loving our neighbor because it makes us suspicious and jealous, and it causes us to treat other people as if they had bad motives that don't really exist in their hearts. When we insinuate bad motives into other people, often the root is actually covetousness. It's important to deal with covetousness in our lives. It's important to deal with covetousness in our lives because covetousness is deadly to the spiritual life. Let me give you a text here. Jesus says in the parable of the talents, Mark 4, he talks about the scattering of the seed, and he says, some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no grain, right? Like, you know the parable. Jesus tells the story of somebody planting gospel seed, the seed of the word of God. And Jesus says, some of the seed falls among the thorns, and the thorns choke the life out of the plant. What are the thorns? The thorns, the others are the ones sown among the thorns. They are those who hear the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desire for other things enter in and choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. It's important to deal with covetousness in our lives because covetousness in our lives actually is one of those things that is absolutely deadly to our spirituality. And it's deadly to our spirituality because it leads us to essentially become idolaters of ourselves, breaking the commandment to love God, and it causes us to become suspicious and jealous of others, causing us to break the second great commandment to love our neighbor. It is a deadly, deadly thing. Now, Timothy gives us a path out, right? Timothy gives us a path out, and his path out includes godliness with, what's this word? Contentment is great gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. The solution for covetousness is contentment, right? And Paul sets the bar really, really low. Food and clothes. That's the bar. It's fascinating. Many years ago, this church has treated me like an absolute prince. You've treated me so well, it's actually quite overwhelming. I mean, several years ago, this church actually sent, some of you are newer here, they sent me and my family to Hawaii on a vacation, and it was the most incredible vacation. Our family, we talk about it. It's like the vacation we talk about the most. I mean, it was such an incredible trip, right? I mean, I grew up in South Dakota. If you grew up in South Dakota, going to Hawaii, I grew up in a mining town, right? A mining town. Miners are, it's like hard work, working class, blue collar, union work. That's what it is. That's how I grew up. I didn't know anybody that went to Hawaii when I was a kid. Like, if you grow up in South Dakota, you don't go on vacation to Hawaii. You go on vacation to Nebraska, right? If you're lucky, you get to go to Colorado, okay? Be like, what'd you do over summer vacation? I saw my grandma in Shadron. What'd you do? Picked corn, right? Going to Hawaii was amazing. It was such a gift of grace. Hawaii is not necessary for contentment. The perspective that the Apostle Paul gives us is, if we have food, we have clothes, that should be enough, because we came into this world naked with nothing, and we're going out with nothing. And so be content with what you have. And the thing he says next to me is so powerful. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. If you ask young people, what do you want to be when you grow up? The number one response is rich. Right? I see a teacher shaking her head. Yep, I know this to be a fact. If you ask young people, I know that to be a fact, because when I was a kid and people would ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up, being rich is not a thing, right? Like, it's not what you do. Like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Be rich? That's not how it works. After first service, somebody said, well, is it wrong to have financial goals? And I said, no, it's not wrong to have financial goals. But what Paul is actually saying is this: our goal should not be to be rich. Our goal should be to do the most good in the world that we can. Those who desire to be rich, if your goal is to be rich, you're going to suffer some very serious temptations that are going to make a dumpster fire out of your life. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. I read an incredible business book by this guy who he's just like a rocket ship maker, and he invented this idea of mining asteroids, and he's built a company to mine asteroids. The guy is an absolute genius, and he said the next billionaires are people who will solve 1 billion people's problems for $1. Notice the focus: solving people's problems. You follow me? If you have the desire to be rich, you're going to have all kinds of trouble and temptation in your life that you don't need to have. If your desire is to do good and serve people, the money will take care of itself. The first step to dealing with covetousness is to be content. And the thing to be content with is a very low bar. Food and clothing. Anything above that, you know what you say? Bonus. I got food and clothing and a car. Bonus. I got food, clothing, and 2 cars. Double bonus. I got food, clothing, 2 cars, and the church sent me to Hawaii. What? This is crazy. Who does that? I mean, what in the world? How does that even happen? You see how that shifts your perspective? It shifts your perspective from, oh, I'm in a position of fear and anxiety, to a position of, I've got what I need. I got food, I got clothes, anything above that, bonus. Okay, last text. I want to thank my brother, Christian Hode. Pastor Christian Hode just moved to Central California Conference. He's pastoring down in Bakersfield Central. He's a good friend from South Dakota, one of my first friends to become a Seventh-day Adventist, and was a pastoral colleague for years in Michigan, and we finally got him out to California. We're really happy he's here. He's the one that reminded me of this verse, and I love this verse. He says, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you what? Have. And that's where we usually stop reading, but the next part of the verse is the most important part. For he has said, what? I will never leave you or forsake you. Do you know why we don't have to be consumed with the pursuit of wealth, and we don't have to be consumed with covetousness? Because we are safe and secure. Let me say it again, church. You are safe and secure with Jesus. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. Number one fear people have, one of the number one fears people have is not having enough in retirement. I'm looking out at a group of people that are retired. It's the number one fear. You are safe and secure with Jesus. You guys know my journey, right? My wife was in a terrible accident. It's almost been 2 years ago now. Almost 2 years. It's like 2 years and 8-10 months. I don't know. Not great at counting months spur of the moment here. You know, it's an interesting, I'll tell you, as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor, we all get paid approximately the same. But when your kids are in school, the conference supplements your income a little bit to pay for the education. And so, like, my son gets a good chunk off his college tuition. The problem is, it's a problem. It's not a problem, it's a problem. But the problem is that anything they help with the tuition, right? So, like, if they give $20,000 to Walla Walla, that just increased my wage in the eyes of the government by $20,000. You follow? And I'm not an employee, I'm self-employed, so I have to pay Social Security and federal income tax on all of that. And I'm not, if you're an employee, that your boss pays half and you pay half of your Social Security. So like whatever they send to Walla Walla and MBA, it's like it literally doubles my income, but it doesn't change in any way how much money I actually have. In fact, it reduces my income quite dramatically. You follow the logic of all of that. So my wife, she gets obliterated in a terrible car accident. She works. She doesn't work now, right? So we're no longer dual income. And at that exact moment, our bills are much higher because the tax man comes looking for all that extra money, because it's like all of a sudden, Pastor Nathan is making like 40 grand more a year, right? Like but I don't see 40. I mean, would I love to see another 40 grand a year? I'd love to, but Walla Walla sees it and MBA sees it, right? And then my wife is completely obliterated in this car accident, and I got this ginormous tax bill. And I was so, I don't like talking about finances. I grew up in South Dakota, like in this like English-German family where you just don't talk about that kind of thing, right? But I was stressed out, like very stressed out, because it's like, like 5 G's just doesn't grow on trees when you're a pastor, right? It doesn't grow on trees for anybody unless you're like an almond farmer, but I was very stressed out. Weirdest thing, this guy calls me. He was a friend of mine from Michigan. He now works for the General Conference. Okay, I've been an Adventist pastor for more than 20 years. Do you know how many times I've gotten a call from the General Conference? 0. So he calls me, and he says, we just had somebody fall through on writing a Sabbath School quarterly, and we need somebody to write a quarterly on the book of Romans, and we need it done in a month. Can you do that? I was like, of course I can do that. I love the book of Romans. I've got tons of material on the book of Romans, and it's COVID, right? This was like February a year ago. Like we were locked down, and nobody wanted to see me, right? Because we might kill them with COVID or something, right? So I'm like, and he's like, I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. It sounds great. And he's like, oh, and by the way, we pay like 5 grand. I was like, you guys, I felt so loved. I felt so much of God's care in my life. Like, this was a real crisis for myself and for my family. And God took care of us. And so he says, you can live your life free of the love of money. You can live your life free of covetousness. And the biggest reason you can do that is because you serve a God who has promised to never leave you. You serve a God who has promised to never forsake you. You serve a God who will always come through for you. It might not happen when you want it. It might not happen when you think you need it. But God will take care of you. You are safe. You are safe with Jesus.